Hi there, it's Brenda Cassidy from Braincalm. So I'm going to do some little short tutorials, and I always start off my training, whether live or via webinar, with a little bit about myself. So I'm an occupational therapist by trade. I have been for about 30 years, but by a long mile, my most experience around the area of sensory issues is with myself and with my 3 children. So I'm a mum of 3. My oldest is 13. My next child is almost 12 and my youngest is almost 10. So we have a raft of sensory issues running through the family and myself as well. I'd be very, very hypersensitive, and I'm going to talk about that. My oldest has dyspraxia and hypersensitive, mostly hypersensitive issues. My middle child, my son, would have a raft of sensory seeking issues. So that looks like fidgeting, moving, squirming. I'm going to talk in detail about that. And then my youngest has dyslexia. So we often see, a mishmash of kids who have dyslexia, dyspraxia, ASD, autism, ADHD, and so on and so forth, mixed with sensory issues. So I'm going to be talking about the sensory parts, and it's causing havoc across the world in schools, and what looks like behavioural issues, but in fact, if we can get to the root of the sensory something going on, and we can do something to help that child, it can make a world of difference to the classroom, to the child, and to the home. Okay, so back to myself and my own kids. So I am going to start to teach you a little bit about applying a colour to a set of behaviours, okay? And this will make sense in the coming tutorials. So I'm going to talk first about Carla. So Carla has dyspraxia and hypersensitive sensory processing disorder. So Carla's mostly, not all, mostly hypersensitive issues, we're going to apply the colour blue to that. Now this will all become clear later on in a later tutorial, but let's just think about these as blue behaviours. So she's hypersensitive to sound, so things can be too loud. You'd often find her when she was younger covering her ears. Lights are too bright, so she would be squinting and squinting at the whiteboard, complaining of excessive light, or a very sunny day giving her a headache. She would be talking about sounds being so loud that they would give her headaches, smells being so strong that they would make her feel sick. So a child having a lunch beside her might actually make her feel physically gag. And it looks like she's overreacting, but in fact, she's not. It's how her brain is processing it. So touch as well is another sense that she was very, very oversensitive. So she actually never wore a pair of jeans, believe it or not, until she was about 11 years old, because she could not tolerate the seams. And to this day, she will cut off her own labels from her own clothes. But also, if you just touched her when she was younger, ow, it was almost like you punched her. It was that painful for her. Trying to brush her hair or wash her hair would have been, felt like driving nails into her head, she would have said, when she had the language skills to tell me what was going on. So I will be talking, I promise, about this in more detail, but I just want to give you a little bit of background as to why I have experience in this. So hypersensitive in touch, in sound, in taste, in smell, in her eating, very, very picky eater. She'd been a very white or bland eater. So she would have chicken on one side, the pasta on the other side, and the vegetables. No sauce, no food mixed. Very, very picky eater. And let's see what else. Very, very sensitive in her stomach. So she would have been very, very sensitive to wheat, and you would see her stomach actually start to blow up if she had too much wheat. And also you can see, and Carla would have been like this in her younger days, not so much now, very, very, very hypersensitive in her emotions. So emotionally, where other children might say, oh, that's very sad, and then move on to think about something else, this might stay with that type of child, and did with her. So that's a very quick overview of her hypersensitive blue behaviours. And again, as I said, I'll explain why I've applied colours to later on. Just to say as well, I definitely had dyspraxia as a child, undiagnosed, mild probably. I was covered in bruises all the time. Dyspraxia historically would have been known as a clumsy child syndrome. And if you guys want me to, I can give you a little short tutorial on dyspraxia. It's another complicated set of issues which very much interlink with sensory, and children that you will see with dyspraxia will also often have sensory issues as well, as do the kids with autism will have sensory issues too. So that was her, and those are blue behaviours. So very, very briefly moving on to my son. So my son has what mostly, he has a mix, but what I would say mostly are red behaviors. So his red behaviors are more sensory seeking type behaviors. Okay, so his red behaviors would consist of, are you ready for this? Fidgeting, moving, squirming, excessive biting, excessive chewing. In some children, you can see sniffing, licking, shouting out. I call these kids shouter-outer, walker-abouters, because they can't help themselves, and they will often want to hear the sound of their own voice over and over again, or need to hear sound over and over and again. So you're fidgeting, moving, squirming, biting, chewing, licking, sniffing, shouter-outer, walker-abouter, bang, crash, walloper in the yard. Okay. So what this looks like in the classroom is always moving, always squirming, sitting on the feet, wrapping the legs around at the front of the chair, going over to pare the pencil 10 times. And what he was doing, now that I know, and I started to study this formally about 7 years ago when I stepped away from my job to look after Carla's issues and then my son's, that he was actually giving himself a little sensory break. Okay, and I'll be talking about that in a later tutorial as well. So those are what we call red behaviors, folks. Okay, now he had a few blue behaviors mixed in. You know, there was a period of time there when I would go just like that on the top of his head, and he'd go, ow, ow, that's really painful. So there can be a mix in these kids of hypersensitive and sensory seeking. They're two different types of processing problems, brain sensory processing problems, but that's what it looked like for him. And for example, you know, he might be chewing the top of his water bottle, but then if I made a curry that was too hot or chilly, he would feel it was burning his lips and burning his tongue because he was hypersensitive. So this area is really, really confusing, folks. I could spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about sensory issues, and I still wouldn't have imparted everything that I've learned over the last number of years. It's very complicated, but it's my job to try and make it easy for you. Okay? So, and just to say, these are all kids that can be very, very, very much helped by Braincalm. Then the third type of sensory issue, and I see this in my little one and in my son, sometimes again mixed, is what I call very low arousal. And I hope nobody is insulted when I say this, and I'm not comparing your child to an animal, I promise, but I have to work in visuals because I'm quite dyspraxic myself. So working in pictures and colours and in blocks and squares and things divided out works really, really well for me. So for that child, I would call them quite sloth-like. Okay, I'm not calling them an animal, but sloth-like in their behaviors. So if you know what a sloth is, they're a very slow moving animal. They're very slow to get along with things. So in these type of behaviors, and note that I'm not saying child, because you can have a mix of these and often will. So in these type of behaviors, you will see a child who it could be lying across the table. It looks like they're being lazy and inattentive, but in fact, I call the volume button is turned down too low in their brain, and they're not processing sensations enough. All right. So I call these set of behaviors yellow behaviors. The child is quite be disengaged, looking out the window, looking at the birds flying past, and you really have to try and go, John, jump. Ooh, and then the child might jump and startle. So, you know, that is what those are what I call yellow behaviors. Those are the low arousal or sloth-like behaviors, okay? So they're kind of the three sensory behaviors that I talk about. I'm going to talk in the next tutorial about the Braincalm ladder. And it's again to explain just in picture format and understand and get into your head what these behaviors are and what they look like. Okay, I'm not trying to turn you all into OTs out there, and I do not train professionals. I don't train OTs, physios. I only train school staff and parents for a reason. There's other companies who do lots of training for professionals out there. No, I'm going to do stuff in very, very, very down-to-earth language for you guys out there. So the fourth type of behaviors that I'm going to talk about, which isn't necessarily sensory, but I'm going to talk about children who are very anxious, who are very low, and who just are very sad. And they've got sad little faces, and their little shoulders are up, and they're just perpetually down in the dumps. And it's very hard for them seemingly to get through the day. So these are four particular types of children of behaviors that I'm going to be putting up on a Braincalm ladder for you. And I'm going to explain that to you tomorrow as to how we use Braincalm to bring some behaviors down and how we use Braincalm to bring some behaviors up. Okay, so if we just get the basics into our heads first, that like my daughter Carla, mostly hypersensitive behaviors. Things are too bright, sounds are too loud, smells are too strong, tastes are too strong, clothing is uncomfortable, very emotional and much more than that, and I will get into detail, but let's call those the blue behaviors, okay? And you're fidgeting, moving, squirming, constantly on the move, shout or out or walk or about or bite or chew or lick or constant sniffer. Those are seeking behaviors. The brain isn't feel comfortable because it's not getting enough, and it's seeking what it isn't naturally getting or processing. So those are red behaviors. And then the yellow behaviors are the very low arousal, almost sleepy, almost disengaged, very sloth-like behaviors. Those are yellow. And then finally, the little child who's anxious and sad, the little face, and we're going to refer to those as black. I just put the color black because it's kind of like there's a black cloud over this child. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an overview and about my own kiddies and myself, and I'll tell you more as we go along. Just to say about Braincalm, it's a 15-minute a day program that I developed. Physical exercises, we do them in a specific order, we do them for a specific time. There are 4 blocks. Each block is 6 weeks long. I originally developed it for mainstream children with something going on that I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I did recognize there was a huge amount of poor attention, behavior issues, kids' difficulty with self-regulation, really struggling to manage their mood and behavior, children who were very low, very sad, very anxious, children who were struggling with sitting, with handwriting, all those issues. And I did originally develop it for mainstream, but more and more people are coming to us, myself. I have 7 tutors as well who teach Braincalm all over Ireland, or did before COVID-19 came along. So we're moving a lot to webinars now. We've taught about 5,000 people so far, and Braincalm has been hugely effective when used daily, 5 days a week. 24-week program. It's a 24-week program for kids in mainstream schools. Now, people are coming to us from ASD, autism, spectrum disorder, special classrooms, and parents as well. For ASD children who might have difficulty learning the exercises, it would take them a longer time. You can sometimes get up to 4 years out of the program, so you could use 1 block per year, but mostly it's 1 block every 6 weeks for the mainstream children. But anyway, that's to do with Braincalm. But for now, remember those, and the next little tutorial I'm going to do is the Braincalm ladder of arousal and explain how the red behaviours, the blue behaviours, the yellow behaviours and the black behaviours, and what we're going to do about those. Okay, so talk to you next time.